Hi guys, Mike here and welcome back to another video on the channel. In this video, while I'm doing this camp out, I'm going to pop the rooftop tent. I'm going to give you a bit of a run round of my view of it really, and whether I think you should buy it or not, and really relating not just to this specific tent but rooftop tents in general, and this particular style of rooftop tent that is like a fabric traditional style rooftop tent. But definitely one of the major pluses of this particular tent is how low profile it is. It's only about 15 centimetres just below the ladder there at the lowest point when folded up, and obviously 33 where the ladder is, but that's pretty low profile, and 43 kilos. As someone who likes to still maintain off-road capability in the vehicle and keep most of the weight down low, and if you know my vehicle you know most of the weight is pretty down low in terms of all the frame reinforcements and stuff, it's nice to not have too much weight on the roof. But let's open it up and have a good look at it. Before I do open it up, I've just made a couple of changes to mine. These buckles here, I've replaced these with plastic clips. The reason being is originally they're these metal D-rings. In the winter they get a little bit cold, but also I find them, they just take a very, very long time to actually open. So these make it much faster. Also put a really big lanyard on the actual zipper, like a zipper pull, with a snake knot, and that just allows me to grab it like a handle from the other side and pull it towards myself, because when you're using this tent on your own, you know, it does take a little bit of time to set up. Another thing to mention is if you leave the metal ones on here and you do this, you put dents in your doors, so it's another reason why I converted to plastic. When you set it up and you're on your own and you've unzipped around here, a little tip is just to loosen up these straps here. You've got one here and one the other side, because then you'll just have to come around for a second time to actually open the tent. And again, I replaced the buckles on these with small clips instead of D-rings, like metal D-rings, just to save time setting up. With these zip-on style covers at the top, when you have auxiliary gear at the back, it can be quite difficult to access the zip in between, and that's just something you need to bear in mind. So when you have your auxiliary gear on, leave a little bit of a gap if you can, just to make it easier. But now this is unzipped, this cover comes down like that. You might think, where's this cover go? And that's really where it ends. Here. The downside of this is when it rains, and rain comes from all directions, it will just kind of soak the inside of this, and if you then have to pack the tent away in the rain, which is something we've had to do many a time, then the water gets slung inside, so you have to spend a bit of time getting most of the water out of this, and get yourself a microfiber towel and dry it off, then put it back over the top. But it was always my intention to build something where you could roll this up and tuck it under the roof rack, or clip it to the side of the roof rack so the rain didn't get in. But given this is the last time I'm using it, you know, I won't be doing that. There we go. There's a little button on the ladder, and that clicks it in place. But what I will say is my ladder's broken, and I'll show you why in a sec. And then the tent opens just like this. The ladder is one of the major supports of what stops the whole tent collapsing, and the tent's rated up to about 260 kilos in terms of the weight it can bear. This pin here slides in and out. It's kind of susceptible to corrosion, and in fact mine is corroded completely on this side and just come apart and sprung to pieces. So I assume this side will go as well too, and I would never trust that with my weight up there, because it would probably collapse the tent. So I have a tent peg, and I drilled just the original holes out where everything went, and I just put a tent peg in there. The quality of the ladder is okay, and it's what you come to expect really from these roof tents. They all seem to have this same generic style of ladder, although some have a telescopic ladder. But you can drill holes in this wherever you want, obviously making adjustments where you think's necessary. And the quality of the hardware that comes with this roof tent I actually think's particularly poor. I've replaced all the hardware with stainless bolts, and what you often find, or what I found with this roof tent, is that all of the nuts and bolts are just basically going through holes that are just far too large for them, and things tend to move around everywhere and there's a lot of play. So you can almost upgrade from M6 to M8 just here, and you can then actually have a pretty solid setup. And the same goes in all the hinges for the actual roof tent. I had to change all of that when I first bought the tent, and since then it's been far better and I've not had any excessive signs of wear. It's important to make sure that these flaps are really well secured down as well with Velcro, especially if you live in a country with a lot of mosquitoes like here in the summer, or else they will get in through that point, and not just one or two. This side's easier to set up from inside the tent, but because I don't like getting in there and taking my boots off, I do it from outside and I just kind of grin and bear it. And you just have to be a little bit of a contortionist to do it, and I guess you could say that's one of the cons, or just laziness. So for the most part, that's the tent set up, and you can really do that in under 5 minutes on your own when you're used to setting it up. There are some things that, you know, can be a bit irritating when you're doing it day after day, like putting these poles in can be quite frustrating, and I think if you're going to look for a fabric tent like this, maybe look for one that uses as fewer poles as possible, just to make it easier on yourself, because it's when it's up on top on the vehicle, unless you can get on the vehicle really easily with a ladder and walk around the rack and, you know, just kind of take it easy, it is quite hard actually sometimes to do that. And not only that, if you're on your own and it's wet like it is now, and you slip off of your rails that you're walking on, you hit the deck, you don't really want it to be a hazard to set up your tent every day in that kind of climate. So it is just something to bear in mind really. When it's been raining heavily, and it may be raining heavily later, what you'll see is this becomes a puddle like that, and then it gradually spills water down all of the time. And when you get in the rooftop tent, sometimes you come out in the morning and you forget about it, it can pour all over you. So these poles really don't keep it as tight as it needs to be, and maybe what you could do is build something that, you know, kind of pulls this down a little bit when it's raining and tie it to the ladder so all of the water spills off, and then unclip it in the morning. It's always something I intended on doing but never really got round to doing it, just because yeah, you know, you kind of pick good weather when you go camping most of the time. This is one thing I've added, just a mesh here, and I've literally just screwed into the aluminium there with some pretty aggressive screws. And this is kind of useful because when you go up in the rooftop tent, you can take your boots off if they're wet, or even a wet jacket, put it in here and not bring it in the tent with you and get it dirty, because dirt builds up in there and it is actually quite hard to clean inside the rooftop tent. The interior dimensions of the tent are 2,438mm long and 1,295mm wide. And right in the middle there, you're looking at 1,168mm high in that highest point in the centre, and and that's obviously not excluding the rainfly. This is internal dimensions, which is really probably the most important dimensions, because you want to know if it fits and whether you're going to be comfortable in there. I mean, with the tent like it is now, you can see one of the benefits of this style of rooftop tent is you have quite a high point in the centre. But with regards to material, you're looking at the actual body of the tent is 260 grams, 600D polycotton ripstop. So it's a relatively tough material. It's not the toughest material out there in terms of rooftop tents, but it's a pretty good, robust material. And I've even caught it in the zip a few times now, and it hasn't ripped. So, it's heavy enough as well to kind of deflect the wind off and give you a little bit of peace. The Rainfly is a UV resistant waterproof 400D polyester, and it's obviously a very thin material. Some of these roof tents come with just as thick a material on top as the actual body, but in this it's a pretty thin one. I guess it's going to help with weight, but the downside being is, when the wind goes, that cover on the outside really makes a lot of racket, and it can make sleeping in open areas, mountainous places where you've got very little cover, quite difficult if it's windy. The tent itself is actually made of aluminium, and it's got foam inside it. So it's an aluminium frame with aluminium panels either side, and they've put a foam inside it for insulation. And even sleeping in this particular setup when the temperatures were as low as -20 degrees C, I still had a very warm night with the correct insulation beneath me. So I wouldn't worry about being elevated and that affecting the thermal sort of capability of the tent. You are a bit higher, the wind is going to hit you a bit more, but you're still going to have a very comfortable night, and it's still very wind resistant due to the material it's made from. But it's raining a lot, so let's go inside and have a look at what it's like inside. The door comes in two parts. You've got this heavy outer piece here, which I've put some little lanyards on so I can peg it up onto these poles there, provided the rain isn't coming in this way. And then you actually have a fly sheet too. So I've rolled mine up. I always roll the fly sheet up when I put the roof tent away, and that allows me to grab the mattress from the other side when folded and pull everything in position so it folds as flat as it can possibly go. But you'll see this is the fly sheet here, and you have two windows either side and a door at the back, and they all have fly sheets too, so you can have the whole thing open on a sunny day. It's pretty comfortable in here, and there's a lot of space. I mean, you can see that if I really need to get changed, I can obviously stand up like this, put a pair of trousers on. I just have to arch my back, and I'm about 5'10", so yeah, it takes if you're really tall, probably not going to be great for you in that way. But you can sit up in here, you can obviously read, you can do whatever you like really, and you've got these windows here and one at the back if you want to open it, the door, and get sort of a good observation of what's going on around you. The nice thing as well is in the morning when it's really quiet and you've been sleeping up here, and if you sleep with the windows open on a warm summer's day, you can look out and you can see wildlife. And I guess that's one of the benefits of being up like this and in an elevated position. But it's a very comfortable tent. There's a few things to point out whilst I'm up here. Either side of me you can see where the hinges are, and down below those hinges you've got a piece of fabric. If you live in a country with mosquitoes, it's really important that you push that piece of fabric down into that gap as best you can, or use some socks or anything really that you have up here to stuff in there to stop them getting in. I've been in quite a lot of parts of Sweden and Norway as well, where I've been using this rooftop tent, and the flies, they always find a way in, but it's really about minimising that as best you can. There are specific flies that you have in this country that are so small, they come through the mesh, and that's one thing that I was very disappointed about with the Front Runner range. The ARB range comes with a much finer mesh, and I think they've taken into consideration like northern territories where there is a Front Runner range, being from a slightly different part of the world, probably don't factor that in. You've got quite big mesh, and there's a very small type of fly. We call them midges in the UK, but here in Sweden and in Norway they're actually smaller than the midges we have in the UK. They're called like Svein here, and it's a tiny little fly, smaller than a pinhead, and they come through this mesh in waves, and sadly you have to have the doors closed in the summer, and I have to get up onto the roof rack and come inside the top of the tent, and I have to put a t-shirt over the top of this gap here, this kind of vent you have at the top to let a lot of the condensation out the tent, which is nice, but you know, it's not great for the flies. I have stitched another layer of mesh here just to try and minimise the amount of flies that get in, but even then they're that small they get through, so it's kind of about finding the right mesh to repair the tent. But as you can see, there's so much that I just never got round to it. Another element to bear in mind is when it's windy, the bars where they meet the fabric make this sound. You might not think that's a problem, that might not bother you. If you're a light sleeper, it will bother you, trust me. I mean, I'm not the lightest sleeper, but that drives me crazy. And when it's windy and the tent is blowing around, you'll hear this creaking, and it's almost better when the wind's heavy because you actually don't then hear it. But when the wind's light, you get this creaking all the time. So what you can do on these bars is you can get some foam. You can disconnect the bars from the bolts at the bottom, put some WD-40 or something on the foam if it's a tight fit, and slide it up the pole and just put it on the corners there. And you know, a bit of fabric, even a sock, actually works. So if you're camping in here, you can put like a sock up there and it'll make a difference. But obviously there's 6 positions that all do the same thing, so it's better to just permanently address it if you've got this rooftop tent, or you're considering buying a traditional tent like this, and you're a light sleeper. Other than that, there's not really a huge amount going on up here. It's very comfortable, I really like it. It's well ventilated, so what you'll find is when you sleep in here, you never have a problem with condensation and dampness on the edge of the actual tent. I only ever have that really on the winter, on the actual bag itself, and a little bit on certain areas of the tent, but everything mostly goes out this hole here, and the tent remains fresh and well ventilated. And as I say, me and my wife, we slept in this tent back to back for about 3 months, around 15 weeks or so, and we never had any issues with damp or mould. But one thing you really need to do is air out your bedding and take the mattress out. If you've got the traditional foam mattress that comes with these styles of rooftop tent, it will be living inside a washable polyurethane bag that you can unzip and take the foam out. But what you can do is take this whole thing out the tent and hang it, because what happens is moisture builds up over a period of time between the mattress and the aluminium frame at the bottom. One important fact about this particular rooftop tent that I mentioned right at the beginning of the video was that how it had a low profile when folded up. But that's one of the pros in some way, but also a con in another. The thing you have to think about this particular rooftop tent, this Front Runner Featherlite, whether it be the 1.3 or the 3 or any kind of new updated version, is you cannot fit your bedding very easily inside this rooftop tent when folded. The mattress it comes with is about 60mm thick, so it's a relatively thick foam mattress. And when we ran that mattress for a while when we travelled Europe, I found it a little bit hard. So what we ended up doing was going to IKEA, and we bought a 1-inch memory foam topper to go on the mattress, and that totally transformed it and made it really, really comfortable. And you know, we travelled the whole rest of the trip like that and continued to use it after when we arrived here in Sweden. But the thing to bear in mind is that we always struggled to fit anything other than the mattress and the topper inside the rooftop tent. So you have a little bit of space, for example, with that topper. If you didn't run the topper and you have the traditional mattress that comes with the tent, maybe you can fit a couple of sleeping bags in there, some small sleeping bags. But if you hope to fit anything relatively well insulated in there or comfortable, like a double sleeping bag, some pillows, a thicker sleeping bag, any other gear, then you don't really have much of a chance in doing that unless you go down the inflatable route with a lot of things like the pillows and stuff. We had to store a lot of our equipment, our bedding, in a roof bag at the back of the vehicle. It was a waterproof roof bag from Hannibal that we borrowed from a mate of ours. But it was useful because all of our bedding was at least on the roof of the vehicle rather than inside it. But with other rooftop tents in this design, if you went for something a bit bigger, a bit more robust, that didn't focus so heavily on reducing its weight and being low profile, you can actually fit bedding inside of it. Not all of these traditional rooftop tents, like this one you see here, has such a restriction on internal space when folded. But one thing I did to remedy this particular rooftop tent is I put in an inflatable mattress. I went with an Exped Megamat Duo 10M, and it's a pretty good swap for this particular rooftop tent, and just for camping in general when you're camping as a couple and you want a double bed to sleep on that feels like home. The only thing to bear in mind is it is wider than this rooftop tent, and where these bars are here, it will fold on it and it will burst it like it did with mine and have to be repaired. So my solution around that was to pack it inside the original polyester cover that came with the foam mattress. You just unstitch the centre part where it folds to make it one continuous sock. You slide in the air mattress and it constrains the edges just a little bit and actually keeps it conformed to the shape of the rooftop tent, and it never pops again. It also makes it much stronger in the long run as well because it's got a cover, and since I've run it that way it's been really comfortable. It's also been easy to inflate and it doesn't get burst anymore. And the best part about that now is using the electric pump and the auxiliary battery and that extension cable I showed you in the last video. I can run it up here, I can suck the air out of the mattress, and the whole rooftop tent can be folded away with my sleeping bag in. I know with pillows is a bit too much to ask, but at least the sleeping bag and the mat can be folded away up here. So my sleep system is at least contained pretty much in the rooftop tent and not taking up space anywhere else in the vehicle, because it's a pretty bulky thing. But I run an Outwell double sleeping bag, and it's a Constellation Luxe double, a 4-season bag, and the lowest temperatures I've been in this bag in are around about -2, and I was pretty warm. So I think any lower you begin to kind of struggle a little bit and you need more insulation. But other than that, I'm real happy with the setup. It's just a shame it's not big enough and it's going to have to disappear, and we're going to have to find something else to accommodate the family. Well, I hope I've given you a bit of an insight into this style of rooftop tent and this particular one as well. And it's worth shopping around and really considering what you need. And I think when you're new to something, it's hard to know what you need. So you turn to YouTube and Google and all the other sites where you find reviews on. And I can only really give you my experience and my opinion from my experiences of using this particular setup. And I'm not the most experienced overlander with this kind of gear. Most of my experience comes from backpacking and camping in a traditional sense, carrying my gear, camping out in bivvy bags. But as interest for travelling grew and we started backpacking in other countries, we decided that we had the Jeep obviously for work, and gradually worked on it and built it up into an overland vehicle that we could use and travel to remote places with. And we're not the kinds of people who have done massive expeditions across vast unbroken wilderness for thousands and thousands of miles. We've travelled around Europe, and we live in the north of Sweden in a fairly remote place, although we just live in a town kind of in the north of Sweden where everything around here is pretty remote anyway. But you have this kind of thing on your doorstep. You can drive 5 minutes out of town and it's wilderness everywhere because it's just a small town and everything's pretty distant from each other in this country. It's not like the same as Canada, which would be far more remote, where my wife's family's from, but it's, you know, it's similar in a sense anyway. It's one of the last wildernesses of Northern Europe, really. But there are some glaringly obvious pros and cons to having a rooftop tent. One of the things is you've always got flat ground, so you never really have to care about what you're driving over. I've been in some real rocky, real rough environments where it would have been impossible to pitch a tent on the ground and have a comfortable night. Even with a really thick mattress, you'd be sliding everywhere. But with the rooftop tent and a vehicle with pretty good solid axles and suspension on it, the vehicle can be heavily articulated, but the top of the vehicle can be completely level. And that's kind of one of the benefits of the rooftop tent. Maybe you live in a country where you've got predators, you know, there are bears and all sorts of things around here. Not that I really worry about any of that kind of stuff, because the country I'm in, they're pretty timid and you'd be lucky to see one. But in some parts of the world you do have predators, so maybe you get a false sense of security being in a rooftop tent high up in the ground. You know, I say false because if something really wants to get you, it's going to get you. There are no tent pegs required, so the kind of ground you're on isn't really a problem. A lot of the ground here in Scandinavia is rock. You know, when you're driving over rocky terrain, you can't imagine to be able to hammer a tent peg in the ground, although in that kind of environment you want to use the rocks themselves. But it means you don't have to hammer into the ground or worry about the ground being damp or waterlogged or anything like that. You can be on relatively boggy or very rocky ground and you don't need to really care about it because you're in an elevated position. It's really easy to set up. You just open it up and there you are. Your shelter is made for the night, and then you can get on with other things. So if you don't enjoy setting up a camp, it's quite a quick way of setting up a camp. But what I would suggest is, if you do have one, you don't need to have enormous tyres and a huge lift like I've got on my Jeep. I mean, I like to do fairly challenging off-road trails and find cool campsites at the end of them, but that's because I can do that in some parts of the country where I'm allowed to. But most of Europe, you will not need a vehicle that looks like that. You can just get away with a fairly stock Land Rover Discovery, for example, or a pretty normal Nissan or Toyota or any kind of vehicle, or even a Jeep like that, where you don't have a lift and you keep it stock, and just put on some basic all-terrain tyres like some BF Goodrich all-terrains or some Coopers or General Grabbers or something, and then just go off on your way and enjoy yourself. And the lower the vehicle is, the easier the tent is to set up. Obviously you've got a big lift, big tyres, you've got to clamber up real high to set everything up and put the poles in, and that's one of the reasons you see me struggling to put the poles in, because the vehicle's pretty heavily lifted. Normally with traditional tents, when you've been in humid or very damp climates, you tend to find that the tent gets very damp and needs airing out. Now that's not such a big problem in some way with a rooftop tent, because it's quite well elevated, and as you drive, air tends to rush through the actual setup of the rooftop tent and tends to air it out pretty well. So you do get a little bit of added benefit with it being on the roof of the vehicle when you're driving along. But obviously it's permanently connected to the top of the car, and to disconnect it is pretty bloody annoying. If I want to disconnect that, I have to undo 4 bolts, I have to lift the entire tent off and then basically carry it somewhere in the house and open it up in the cellar, in the warm room we've got down there for gear. That takes a lot of work, and even though the tent is only 43 kilos and I can pick it up on my own, it's still pretty difficult to navigate down windy stairs, and I need the help of my wife to make sure I don't damage the wallpaper or else she'll kill me. So basically one of the disadvantages is it's permanently connected to your car. So if it's really wet for 2-3 weeks in a row and it's not big enough in your garage for you to open the rooftop tent in, you can get mould in the roof tent. And I got quite a lot of mould in my roof tent about 2 years ago when I moved to Sweden, and it was just really difficult conditions in the winter. I wanted to rooftop tent camp and test things to their extreme, and basically we had this fluctuation of temperature where it went above 0, then below, then above 0, then below, and humidity and condensation built up, and basically the thing started to mould. And I still have a few patches there where I haven't been able to scrub it out, and it's kind of stained the actual material. So it's not like a normal tent where you can bring it in the house just in a bag, fold it up, chuck it inside. Maybe you want to even forget about it for a while and then open it up in your basement or wherever else you've got in the house and dry it off. You need to wait for a good day unless you've got a ventilated garage with a really high roof where it can be opened up in. Another disadvantage is you lose fuel economy. It's an already unaerodynamic vehicle to begin with, and most of these old 4x4s are. But you've just slapped a 43 kilo brick, or in my case probably 55 with the bedding in, on top of the roof rack. You're going to lose maybe 2-3 miles per gallon, maybe more. And sometimes it whistles really annoyingly. And mine's whistled for the whole time I've had it. I've never found out where that whistling noise has come from, and I've tried everything, but I've just learnt to live with it. So maybe if you're travelling really long distance in an older style vehicle like mine, where you have no headliner or carpet and it's more kind of utilitarian in its design, then you're going to hear a lot more noise from the outside coming through, and you can hear the whistling of the roof tent. It doesn't bother me and my wife anymore because we're used to it, but some people out there, it might drive you crazy, and on really long trips you want the vehicle to be as comfortable as possible. So there are some added disadvantages of slapping such a big weight on the roof. Another issue might be if you're into off-roading, where you go on very, very difficult trails where the vehicle's off camber. You've just put 55, 60 kilos on your roof, you know, in terms of rooftop tent and bedding, etc. You know, some of these tents weigh even more than that. Some of them can weigh 100 kilos. So putting that amount of weight on your roof with an already heavy roof rack at around about 35 kilos, you're suddenly looking at, you're putting around about, in my case, 100 kilos on the roof with the roof tent, the rack, and the little boat on the back in the roof bag. So that's, you know, quite a lot of weight to throw up top. I mean, you could argue the big tyres, the frame stiffeners, and all the weight gone into the vehicle is mostly low down, and obviously that's what helps me out. But if you've got a relatively stock vehicle, then you're going to notice that weight. Even when I go around roundabouts now, I see the vehicle do this, start to tip, and that's with the anti-roll bar, the sway bar they call it in the US, on the vehicle, connected, and it's still doing that. And me and my wife were in a real scary situation a while ago where we decided to go up a pretty muddy trail up a mountain back when I had all-terrain tyres. And yeah, I mean, the tyres clogged up rapidly with this clay. The vehicle slid to the side. I don't know whether I've still got the footage. If I have, I'll play it while I'm talking about it. But if not, I'll have to act it. The vehicle slid down the trail, started to turn, and then it hit a bend in the bottom of the trail and some rocks and things on the edge, and it lifted, and these two tyres are lifted and went bang straight back down again. And I was really lucky that that vehicle didn't tip over, because I'd have rolled straight down that mountain. The car would have been trashed and I'd have potentially been killed. And you know, that bit of weight on the roof does make a big difference, actually. I used to think it didn't, and I used to kind of argue against it and be like, no, it's fine, it's not a lot of weight. But depending on the kind of vehicle you put it on, it can be a lot of weight, and I think that's the dividing factor. Hopefully this has given you a lot to think about. I'm going to stop talking now, something I'm not good at, as you probably noticed. But yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it helped you in some way. And if you have any suggestions for me and my family of what to do in terms of our next setup, because this will be coming off in a couple of days' time. So this is the last camp with the roof tent. Kind of sad in a way, as we've had some extremely fantastic memories in it, and it brought us to this place that we now call home. But yeah, please leave comments below if you have any advice for us. And yeah, tell me what you thought of the video, and I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you very soon in another one. Take care. Time for a cup of tea. As always.